All right, so let's see if we can copy and paste this landscape that we went over how to create in the other section into our main palace scene. Before we do that though, let's just duplicate it really quickly. And that might take a second because it's kind of heavy. And I just want to make a new material and just create an alternate version for our land or for our snow option. So let's call this snow. And I believe we have to delete the slot of the other material on there. And now the snow will have nothing in there, and that's fine. So let's click back over to here. And all I need to do for this type of duplication is just copy and paste the actual material nodes. So here we go. Let's just grab everything in here and Control C to copy all that. Then click over here to this material and delete everything in there, and then paste with Control V. And now we have a duplicate of that material, but it's in this snow material. So let's, before we get confused, change this green base color to a nice white. And then it's looking a little bit too kind of bumpy for snow. So let's lower the normal map to maybe 0.1. And then I've found, again, upping the metallic and lowering the roughness a little bit can work well. And let's check that in rendered view. Yeah, that's generally, excuse me, that's generally the right direction. Okay, so we have these two landscape options. Let's select both of them. And all we have to do to put them into our palette scene is just copy and paste them into the other tab, which I have open as a Blender tab. So let's Control copy both of those and open up our palette scene. And let's do this in solid mode so that it doesn't become too heavy when we paste them in. And I'll just hit Control V to paste them. So we actually pasted them into a collection that would instance all over the place. So they actually instance everywhere. So let's move them into their own collection, and we'll call this Mountain 1. And let's move them over here so that we can kind of see what we're doing here. And they should be down here. And let's offset them a little bit and just make sure they should have pasted in with all the materials correctly set up. Yeah, that's looking about right. So let's put the snow option into another collection called Mountain 2, so that they're each in a separate collection that we can instance. And we'll click on one of them and instance to scene. And now we should be able to duplicate that all over the place without too much extra heaviness on the scene. So when I instance it right there, we actually had the origin of the instance really far away. You see this orange dot from the world origin. And so that's why this instance is, it placed the origin of that instance really far away as well. So all we need to do is just set origin to geometry, and now it's back to the center of the instance. So let's just move this up a bit and start thinking about how this will work in camera view. Oh, real quick, let's do the same thing to the snow option. Before we instance it, we can just get around that by setting the origin to the 3D cursor, which is at the world origin. And now when we instance it, it should place in the exact same spot. I don't know if I went over that with instances before, but it's a quick tip on how to get that origin to work correctly. And now if we set it back to geometry, we can move it around with it centered to itself. Okay, so we have a snow option and we have a grass option. Let's move this camera view into material view, just so that we can kind of see them being placed here. And generally speaking, I think it would make sense if the snowy mountains were a little bit further away, maybe higher up. And leading up to them, we would see some of the less mountainous, sort of lower grassy hills. So let's rotate and scale them a little bit so that it's not quite so apparent that they're very similar meshes. And let's duplicate this instance over here. You can stretch this out a little bit. Again, I just want this one to kind of appear as a low hills and maybe scale it up so that it's much closer to camera in comparison to some of these distant snowy mountains. And I'm not sure exactly what we want to do compositionally with this yet. We have to think about it soon though. I think generally speaking, we don't want it too symmetrical on either side of the palace. So I'm thinking if we just add a little bit more emphasis to this left half, it could work and lead your eye in toward the center. But we do want something in the background over here to kind of stop your eye from exiting the frame to the right. So something kind of on the edge here, just a little bit smaller, just to kind of, again, kind of block the path of your eye as it travels to the right could make some sense. So let's see how that's all looking in rendered view for a second. I'm not completely convinced about the placement of the mountains. It might make sense to have a couple more really, really far away. But you can see now they're interacting with the mist as well. So as they're really far back, the mist is pushing them back nicely. But what's interesting is the mist that we placed with this, remember with this mist cube, it's only, it's not extending to the mountains way back here in the background. So there's actually a limit to the, as right at the edge of this box to how dense the mist will get. So everything past that will be at the same level of density. So that's completely fine. We're actually going to add in a little bit extra mist in Photoshop with the mist pass when we do our final render. And I don't want to scale this up all the way to extend to include the mountains anyways, because that might make the scene really heavy if the mist volume is too big. So we don't need to worry about that too much. So let's just think about the composition of these background mountains again. So I was thinking we might have one in the very furthest distance. And by the way, I had overlays turned off in this camera view. I wasn't sure where that mountain that I had just placed was because it was hidden behind here. But if you just turn on overlays, you'll see this selection that I made over here is not nicely outlined in there. So I'm not getting confused about where it is and what it is exactly. So I'll often switch back and forth between those. All right, so again, compositionally speaking, I just want something that feels natural and draws your eye. It should emphasize this central area without taking up too much of its own. These mountains shouldn't take up too much of the spotlight. So I'm liking that kind of a direction. I think we could maybe have another tree option back here though. And again, just to kind of lead up to these really snowy mountains. It's interesting, I'm not seeing much green on them. And I think that's because we made them a little bit less tall. So let's check that in material view actually. Yeah, actually it's just the way it's angled. There isn't too much of that material on there. I think we should actually adjust the material of these green mountains a little bit. I kind of would like to see a little bit more green and trees on them. That's completely fine. We still have the nodes in here. So if we go into the shader editor, and we won't see them if we're selected on an instance, but if we go in here to the original object, which by the way, we just kind of had placed down here for now out of the camera's view. And we should be able to edit how much green versus rock are on these just with this color ramp. So let's switch over to material view and see if we can adjust that. So I think further this way, yeah, that should get us a little bit more trees. Let's see how that's looking. Yeah, it is there. It's very dark in this particular lighting, and I think it's the mist affecting that. Let's see if we can brighten up the base color of the trees a little bit. And you'll see here in the material view, it's way too saturated and kind of a neon green, but in context of this scene, it does work. You know, when it gets darkened by the atmosphere and the light, it's a lot more vibrant and starting to work better. All right, before we actually start creating and sculpting these characters, I just want to place compositionally some kind of area that they might stand in the foreground here. And I want to just create a balcony really quick. I've just placed these, I've grabbed these scale humans from somewhere else and just kind of placed them floating up here next to where our camera is. And I just want to get a feel for kind of where I want to start building around them. So let's start there, and we'll hit Shift. We'll click on one and hit Shift S and move the cursor to selected so that anytime we place something, it'll go right there. And I'll hit Shift A and just place a cylinder for now. That's going to be the start of our balcony. Before we do anything though, we have this menu here, and let's change that vertices option to a little bit higher. Let's say like 60, just so that it has a little bit more detail right off the bat. And let's go into top view and scale that up, and see that menu disappears. So we're happy with 60 kind of vertices though. Shrink it down and just kind of place this object where a balcony might make some sense. I think compositionally something like that could work. It'll kind of bring you into the composition from this side over here. So let's get it exactly right in terms of relation to their feet here. And we have to decide if we want a circular option like this, or we could potentially try stretching it out a bit oval like that. I think oval will make some more sense. It'll give us some more, kind of draw the eye in a bit more from a compositional standpoint. So let's stick with that. All right, so first things first, let's add in a material to this. I think that our green or kind of marble material will work the best for this. So let's just drop that on there. And I think we should add in some kind of a railing. And I'll show you a quick way to do that, and we'll see if we can design it in a way that makes sense with the rest of our scene here. Just want to move this over here to avoid a tangent with this shape over here. All right, so a quick way to make a railing like this. Let's go into tab view, and I'll go into edge mode and alt click one of these top edges, and that'll select the whole loop all the way around the cylinder. And I'll hit Shift D to duplicate that that circle there, and click to place. And now we kind of have a plane hovering above this cylinder. So all I want to do is hit delete and delete only faces, so that we'll keep the edge around there. So this whole edge, if I alt click on it, should just be an edge. You shouldn't see that in rendered view at all. And I'll hit P to separate the selection from the cylinder. So now we have balcony cylinder and then kind of a floating edge here. And if we go into tab edit mode and hit A to select all those edges again, all I want to try is extruding upward, so that we have from there some kind of a flat railing shape, which is a good place to start. And I'm going to try, let's get it to kind of a size that in relation to these people that would make some sense as a railing. Real quick, scale it down so there's kind of a lip before the edge of the balcony. And yeah, I think it would be a little bit taller, something like that. We can adjust that later. And all I want to do now is go into face mode and hit A to select all the faces in that. And again, I will delete only the faces, so that we're left with just this kind of wireframe of the railing. And now I'm going to try a couple tricks here. So let's go back into object mode. And I'm gonna try hitting spacebar and start typing convert, and we should get this convert to curve option. So I'm gonna try that, and I'll change this object from, or these edges actually, from a mesh, which is kind of the regular standard objects, to a curve. And a curve works in a lot of different ways. We're not going to do too much with it though. You can look into curves if you want to. It's a good way to do like cables and ropes and stuff like that. But for now, let's click down here. You should now see this kind of green ropey curve option down here in these menus. Let's click on that. And this will be everything we can do with that curve. So if we make sure this geometry menu is unfurled here, down here in in bevel, should adjust this depth option. So let's up that a couple points, maybe even just 1 point. And that'll start adding some depth to this shape, to these curves. So we can also up the resolution a little bit, and that should make things a little bit more detailed. And let's move that up on the z-axis just a little bit. I'm gonna adjust that in a second. All right, so now we've added some depth to these objects, and you can mess with all these settings here. Offset will, offset them from each other, kind of like as points. Extrude will kind of give these elements kind of more depth and almost like a flatness, which I actually kind of like. Let's up that a little bit. Something like that I think could be cool. And now we're actually going to convert this back over to a mesh. So let's type convert and enter on a mesh. And now if we tab into edit mode, you'll see it's back to what we're used to with vertices, planes, and edges. And I'm going to try, so this is, this direction would be a good path to go if you were just trying to get like a modern realistic railing. But we actually need to, do a little bit more design work to get it to feel right for this type of flowing shapes environment. So I'm going to try adding in a modifier, and we'll do subdivision surface. And that should basically, and generally speaking, that's my method for getting rigid, right-angled shapes to be more curvy and flowy, which is what we want. So let's up the levels viewport, maybe all the way up to 3 in both cases, actually. And I think something like, a pattern like this could match the shapes in the rest of the scene quite well. So let's try it. Let's scale it up a little bit so it feels a little bit more elegant. And let's, for our own design sense, let's change the material over to this gold material that we've already created, just to kind of get a feel for it. And I think what we should try is just deleting these in-between areas. I don't think they can make sense here, and we can always just create another round shape. So let's do that real quick. If we just tab into edit mode, we'll actually see the original shape as a wireframe around the flowing shape. So all I need to do in order to delete those in-between areas is hover over them and hit the L key. And let's just check what we're doing here. So I'm selecting these in-between areas, and all we want, oh, you know what? We can actually just hit L to select everything else, and then P to separate by selection. There we go. And now we can click on these other areas and delete them. Much faster than going all the way around and selecting the parts we don't want. So yeah, so a direction like this is what I'm kind of thinking. I'd like to try and duplicate that. So we'll try Alt D actually, in case we want them linked. And I'm just gonna scale it. I'm gonna try a couple things here, but basically I just want some kind of a doubled up language, because we have, with this filigree everywhere all over the scene, it's very common, design element to have two or a doubled up shape. So let's see if we can get something like that. I'll just try scaling it up, and maybe on the z-axis could look cool. And we can check this in rendered view in a minute too to make sure that's kind of the direction we want, but I think something like that could be cool. All right, and then I think it might make sense for this railing to sit on its own type of material. So let's real quick go back to the cylinder, select this face, and we'll Shift D, duplicate that face up, P to separate, and now we're going to follow a similar process where we just have this face itself. I'll select that face and inset it a little bit. And I just want this outer ring to match up with this railing. So let's delete that face completely. And let's change that ring over to gold so that we can see what we're doing. And I think scale it down just a little bit so that it kind of lines up better. And we could extrude it to give it some depth, but let's try adding a solidify modifier just so that we have more control later. And if we adjust the thickness here, should see it kind of go downwards into the ground a little bit. And yeah, that's kind of what I was hoping to do there. Next, I think let's work on the edge of this balcony a little bit. I think I just don't like how it's so rigid right now. So let's try scaling up the bottom face of it just a little bit to give it some kind of dimension there. And then I think all of this needs some beveling. Again, most surfaces in real life have some sort of small little bevel. It's very rare for things to be very, very sharp like that. So let's select in edge mode, alt click this whole edge all the way around this balcony, and then alt click this edge as well, and see what happens if we control B to bevel that just a little bit. So you see the beveling is actually going at kind of an extreme direction. So let's hit escape, and I forgot, we need to, in object mode, try Control A and apply all transforms. That usually solves that beveling issue. So let's do that. And now if we tap into edit mode and try it, yeah, the beveling is working kind of more in relation to itself. So let's bevel it just a little bit and then scroll up with, try that again. Scroll up with the mouse wheel to give some more, more rings here. And I just want a tiny bit of bevel, I think. Yeah, something like that. And let's apply the solidify modifier, hover over it and hit Control A and do something similar actually. Let's just bevel both these edges. Again, we need to, in object mode, apply all transforms so that this bevel will work in relation to itself a bit better. Something like that. Lastly, let's see what happens if we select on one of these and hit Shade Smooth. It should get rid of some of those kind of rigid geometry there. Same with this object. Let's hit click on it, right click, Shade Smooth. That'll get rid of some of that. And I think on both of these rails as well, Shade Smooth, yeah, would work a little bit better. All right, let's see how that's looking in rendered view for a second. Let's do a little reality check here. I think the general design is starting to feel correct for this scene. I think we could adjust the placement a little bit. So let's select all these new objects and actually these people too, so that we can select them easier later. Let's move them into the balcony collection just so that they're all together. Now we can adjust them all together. So let's try a couple things here. First of all, let's make sure we're on median point with the pivot point period key hotkey, so that they'll move and scale together. I'm actually not worried too much about scaling the humans, even though that would change their scale in relation to other humans. This kind of balcony setup is sort of just for the foreground, so it doesn't really matter. It won't affect anything too much if they're just a little bit sized differently. So I'm just going to adjust this a little bit. I wonder if they could be even closer to camera, actually. I think what I don't like about the placement right now is that this balcony ends almost halfway exactly through the picture. So maybe if we overlap, maybe if we move it over and overlap a bit more with this tower shape over here, could try that. So it's kind of this whole foreground is now our balcony, taking up the whole composition. I think that might make more sense, something like that. And then if later when we place in our characters, want to make sure these are standing in a way that we like. And story-wise, I'm, in the back of my mind, I'm kind of thinking we might design a little like palace guard character for one of these. And then maybe we'll have another character, and that'll be kind of, the captain or maybe the king of this whole palace area. And that'll be the one kind of towards the front here, looking out over his domain or something like that. So that's just kind of a little bit of what I'm thinking here. Maybe he has some bodyguards also on either side of him. That could be cool. All right, this is a pretty cool direction. I'm liking the placement of the balcony. We can always mess with design later. Let's just see what happens if we put in a couple of plants up here as well. I think having a couple in the foreground could frame everything really nicely. So let's go over and grab one of our birch tree instances. And I think earlier we had kind of separated them from the pot, so it was kind of floating. So let's fix that really quick. So that's our willow tree. So we got to find the original tree that's being instanced from. Should be in its own collection here somewhere. I should have probably color coded them. So here it is, tree willow. Let's actually color code that right now by right clicking on it and just selecting this green option. And we should be able to jump to it. And all we need to do is lower the tree a little bit. And that'll change all the instances. There we go. So now it's a bit better in relation to itself. Instead of duplicating an instance into the foreground here, I'd like to have a little bit more control over it than all these other trees. So let's actually just duplicate both of these. It'll be a little bit heavy, but it's only a couple, real geometry trees, so I'm not too worried about it. So let's hit Shift D in this case and move that this way, and we need to move it in its own or into the balcony collection so that it's not instance everywhere. All right, so let's change this over to solid view so it's not becoming too heavy. You can see there the origin is out of place, so let's set the origin to geometry in both those objects. And all we need to do is place it with the balcony here, which is right there. And we'll probably have to scale it in relation to the balcony a little bit because we did adjust the scale of these people. So it might be cool to have it kind of off here next to the balcony, or we could place a couple plants on the balcony itself. Something like this might hint at more structure below the balcony, which I kind of like. And we're gonna have to be careful because we're blocking off a lot of the composition, which it's tough because it is blocking off our hard work, but at the same time, it might frame things in a really nice way. So let's try duplicating that on this side as well. Don't want to be too symmetrical with this framing. Ultimately, that might just look too perfect, but let's just see how it looks for a second. Let's check it in rendered view. We could also try putting in a couple of small potted plants on the balcony itself. That might feel right. Let's see here. I like the feel of them. They are they're probably blocking off too much of the composition, so we'll have to kind of mess around with that. But generally speaking, I think it really helps to have added in all of these different new foreground elements. I think it'll just make all these distant objects feel, just really feel more distant. And compositionally speaking, you almost always want a foreground, then a midground, and then background elements. All right, I think that's the general direction we want to go. It's looking pretty good. It's also this really dark tree is overlapping nicely with these really bright elements right here. It's kind of the lighting setup we ended up with. So we'll stick with that for now. And I think we're pretty much ready to start talking about designing and sculpting our characters here. So let's keep this composition for now. We can always adjust it if we want. And let's talk about characters next.